We ended our last segment with self-perception phenomena, and now we're picking up with ego-enhancing biases. Social psychologists have discovered a number of biases that most humans tend to display, ones that enhance our egos. And the first one we're going to look at is one of my favorite. The fallacy of normalcy is the tendency to consider ourselves to be normal and use this as a standard by which we judge the normalcy of others, by how closely their beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors match our own. Remember the first official human sexuality study, the Kinsey Report, which was conducted at a time when people believed many early myths about masturbation, myths involving the supposed harm resulting from such behavior. Men were asked to report anonymously, 1, how often they masturbated, and 2, how often they believed would be harmful. Their guess at what was harmful was always higher than their reported behavior. For instance, the ones who reported never masturbating thought a single instance could be harmful. But the man who reported the most masturbating, 18 times a day, thought that one would have to do so probably 25 times a day to be harmful. Interestingly, this bias and the next we're going to look at are unusual because they are beneficial. Those who lack this bias, the fallacy of normalcy, are actually more vulnerable to anxiety disorders. There's a number of them, right? Like generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, phobias, obsessive compulsive disorder, Tourette's syndrome, and so on. So this is interesting because most biases are not functional, right? They're dysfunctional. They don't help us to understand the world better, and they don't help us to predict the world very well. But this fallacy of normalcy and the next one we're going to look at are actually beneficial. How do I love me? Let me count the ways. The Lake Wobegon effect in social psychology is the tendency to think we are better than average, better looking, more intelligent, more perceptive, less biased than others. Of course, only about 50% of people can be above average, statistically speaking, right? But far more than 50% of us think we are. The Lake Wobegon effect has been found in all diverse groups studied to date. No groups appeared to be invulnerable, and this is always found at a rate of 70% or higher. 70-some% of students think they are smarter than the average student. 70-some% of business people think they are more savvy than the average business person. And 70% of professors think we profess better than the average professor. Where did this name, Lake Wobegon effect, come from? It comes from a phrase at the very beginning of Garrison Keillor's Prairie Home Companion radio show. It's about a rural town called Lake Wobegon, where all the children are claimed to be above average. Now, did you display the Lake Wobegon effect? I want you to take out questionnaire number 1. The items on your questionnaire were rated on a scale of 1 to 9, meaning that 5 is the mean or average. You scored your questionnaire by adding up your responses to each item and then dividing by the number of items for your average rating of yourself. So if your score is above 5, you showed the Lake Wobegon bias. Most likely 70-some% of you showed this bias, had a score of over 5. But this is, remember, the other unusual case where the bias actually benefits mental health. People who don't show this bias tend to be more vulnerable to mental health problems. Another ego-enhancing bias is the actor-observer bias or effect. We tend to discount the situation when judging others' negative behaviors, but not our own, and when judging our own positive behaviors, but not others. Let me repeat that. This is really important. So we tend to discount the situation when judging others' negative behaviors and our own positive behaviors, but not others, right? So when we are financially successful, we have a tendency to attribute it to our talent, our skill, intelligence, motivation, etc., right? We discount the situation, are less likely to realize the role played by luck and resources and help we receive from others and other external situational causes. So again, we tend to discount the situation when judging others' negative behaviors but not our own, and when judging our own positive behaviors but not others. When others are caught in poverty, we're more likely to attribute it to personal characteristics like lazy and less intelligent, discounting situations like bad economy, bad luck, societal oppression, etc. But we sure would appreciate the role played by the situation if we were in poverty, right? So this effect is called the actor-observer effect because we perceive behavior very differently when we are the actor compared to when we are the observer. Our fourth ego enhancement bias is implicit egoism. Most people exhibit an unconscious and very subtle form of self-enhancement. As an example, most people rate the letters contained in their name more favorably than the other letters of the alphabet. This kind of thing also subtly influences decisions oftentimes. For instance, there are more Michelles living in Michigan, Georges in Georgia, Carries at the University of Kansas, Dennis or Denises who chose the occupation of dentists. Another example is that more often than we would predict from chance alone, people marry others with similar first or last names, for instance, Patrick and Patricia. Social comparison is the tendency to prefer comparing ourselves with less fortunate others rather than more fortunate others. We feel better about ourselves when we compare ourselves with less fortunate others. We feel better looking around less attractive people, smarter around duller others, more caring around callous others. Social comparison explains why students generally feel much better about themselves in high school than when they begin college and are no longer big fish in a small sea. Upward comparison can motivate you to advance much faster, but it is far riskier to the self-esteem. I used to audition for and fight to get into dance classes that were actually a little above my level. When I succeeded, I really did advance much faster, but my self-esteem sure suffered during that process. Here's some good review questions regarding these ego enhancement biases. So this comic is an example of which one? Pause the video. And the answer is actor-observer effect. I tend to overuse the words luminescent, lyrical, and legendary in my poetry. This is an example of which? And the answer is implicit egoism. My first name is Linda. 70% of tribbles think they are fuzzier than the average tribble. That is an example of which one? The Lake Wobegon effect. Sometimes we might secretly take pleasure in a peer's failure. An example of which? Social comparison. Yeah. Jane thinks it's odd that her sister doesn't want to get married. Her sister thinks it's odd that Jane has never skydived. Example of which? And that's the fallacy of normalcy. You assume your friend did not get a raise this year because she didn't do a great job. Example of which? And that is actor-observer effect, not taking the situation into account.